Well, good afternoon and welcome to this week's live podcast from the Calder Valley. Just to give you a bit of an update, as you know, Parliament is now back in session, albeit um, we are social distancing in the chamber. No more than 50 MPs allowed in the chamber. Similarly, when you do DL committees or committees of the House on bills, they are social distance as well. It's very, very quiet down there. There's no staff down in Parliament. It's just MPs. And of course, MPs are either in committee or squirreled away in their offices during the day. We've seen some major more announcements easing of lockdown to start from next week. We know that you can now find a support bubble and go and meet in a different household. So if you are two single people going out with each other that have been social distancing, providing it is uh, uh, just the two of you in one or two households, you can now merge with your partner's household or whoever you choose for it to be. Um, the non-essential stores are open from Monday, and I dare say we'll see much more of what we've seen, like with supermarkets, so social distancing, very, very key thing to do. And of course, zoos. If you're a fan of zoos, those zoos are allowed to open also. The next announcement is going to be in about 2 weeks' time, just a little bit longer than that, on the 4th of July, where they're expecting, providing the R rate continues to stay where it is or decline, and people continue to social distancing, we'll see more of a relaxation around that date. Okay. So, as normal, we've had quite a few questions into the office this week, and I'll, like with last week, I'll focus in on the national ones first, and if there are any local issue ones, I'll come to those secondary. So, kicking off for this week is from David, who says, "Hi Craig, if dental practices can reopen, why aren't hairdressers and barbers? And considering the brutal violence and vandalism by the BLM activists, why is the government with a strong majority dancing to the mob's tune?" And that's from David. Um, David, first of all, dental services, of course, can reopen from next week. Um, Obviously, if you go to the dentist under normal circumstances, you see your dentist with the face shield and some form of face covering and gown. So they operate normally with PPE, and you can do that again from Monday. Barbers and hairdressers are a little bit different. They obviously don't have PPE and operate under much closer surroundings. So we're expecting, providing the R goes down, people continue to social distance. We're expecting an announcement along with public houses and restaurants in the next round, which is on the 4th of July. But that, of course, is providing we continue to drive that R rate down. As you'll see, I'm not too bad on top. That's because Mrs. W is quite good with the garden shears, and gives me a bit of a trim. But if you not have that facility, unfortunately, you're going to have to wait for a little while longer before you can go to the hairdressers and barbers. I'll cover off. I'll cover on that because the next two or three questions I notice are very similar. I've had one from Richard and one from I think it was Kenneth about the uh, Black Lives Matters demonstrations. Look, there's two things here. First of all, of course, Black Lives Matter, as do all lives in our society. And the intolerance in the police force in America is totally unacceptable. And as a rule, we don't see that here in this country. But I strongly agree that people have the right to protest and voice their opinion, providing they are social distancing. But the second element, of course, is the small element of thuggery and vandalism and people that have got involved that take away from the core message, which is Black Lives Matters. In those instances, in my view, those people should be arrested, they should be charged, and if necessary, if they cause incredible damage to property or indeed to our police force. There were horrendous scenes in London. That poor WPC who was on a horse who was scared and she got knocked unconscious. And we saw firsthand from people on social media how people were throwing bikes at the police horses, how the violence. I think there's close on 40 police officers been injured now. That is unacceptable behaviour, as is destroying, vandalising, uh, ripping statues up and putting them in the Bristol Harbour. In my view, is totally unacceptable. And I kind of get the argument that some of these statues shouldn't be up anymore, but that is not the decision of thugs to take down those statues and do with them as they so wish. And in fact, if anything, the country's gone a little bit mad this week because we've seen huge debates right around the country about which monuments, which statues we're going to local authorities are going to turn down. I don't agree with that either. Look, we all have our history is our history, whether we like it or not. You can't rewrite history. And my grandmother used to say to me, to understand where you're going in life, you need to know where you've been. And these monuments to people that have also done some great in our society are there for a reason, and it is not for these thugs, these idiots, to rip down our monuments just because they don't like it. There's lots of monuments around Calder, around Yorkshire. You know, there's a statue just outside um, Huddersfield Railway Station, which is of Harold Wilson, one of our former prime ministers. Now, I'm not a socialist and I didn't agree with everything that he did, but I at least have the respect to know why it's there and respect that because he was our former prime minister of whatever political persuasion. So I think I've made my views fairly clear on that. But just to um, uh, finish off for Richard's question, because he goes on about rewriting history and allowing people to take the law into their own hands. In my view, they should be arrested, they should be prosecuted, fined at the very least, locked away in serious cases, and the police need to really do start need now, in my view, to get a grip. The next question from Dylan is about, hi Craig, I know the PM keeps saying that hospitality business may be allowed to open on the 4th of July, but we need more. Would it be possible to get at least 2 weeks notice? If you can ask that question to the PM in the House, please. Well, the reality, Dylan, is that, the 4th of July is still over 2 weeks away. If you're asking the Prime Minister to make a decision now on whether we open on the 4th of July, then I suspect the decision will be no, because the R rate, whilst below 1, is still quite high. 2 weeks under this pandemic, as we have seen, is a long period of time. So unfortunately, whilst I understand you would like some time to prepare, I noticed when I drove past the Sun Inn yesterday up in Rastrick, Lance and the team are all up there cleaning and preparing the pub. So I would say get prepared, because if it doesn't happen on the 4th of July, it will happen at some point in the future. So 2 weeks notice, I doubt very much you're going to get, because it is a very fluid situation. Can we guarantee the 4th of July? Who knows? That depends on the R rate, and the scientific advice will be taken into account, as always, by the decision makers in government. Next question is on the test, track and trace system from Gary. How does the test, track and trace system work is his plain answer. Well, basically, Gary, how it works, and I think I reported last week when I did my live Facebook, what we're doing now, was that I had spoken to our local leaders who are driving this forward locally, A, to get a better understanding of how it works, and B, how it's working locally. And I can tell you we're now on, I think, our 3rd week, and that is working incredibly well. So basically, in a nutshell, Gary, I go and get tested, and it transpires that I've got COVID. What I would say to you, it is very, very important during the testing process to go almost as soon as you get the symptoms of COVID, because the sooner you get to it, there is a period of time that the whole system works much better that way. But anyway, so you go and get tested, you've got COVID. The Public Health England will then ask you who have you been in contact with over the last 2 weeks or period of time. You give them a list of names that you have, either who lives in your house, for example, or who you've been in the vicinity of over that period of time. Public Health England then ring them and ask them to self-isolate. So that's how it is monitored. Generally, that is the alert will come by either text, email, or phone call. And basically, you can log on to the NHS Test and Trace website, which is normally the easiest way for you and the service to communicate with each other, where a call handler will talk you through the process. There is an app that's coming out as well, currently being in test stage on the Isle of Wight. That should be coming out later on in the month to as a tool to help that process as well. So I hope that that indicates or answers your question. Kenneth asks, hi Craig, given that the party have a good majority, would you consider finding a better choice of leader and inner cabinet from the rest of the MPs to step forward under the present circumstances? Thanks for your question, Kenneth, but no, I don't agree with you. I think the Prime Minister is a very good Prime Minister. As you will know, we don't agree on 1 or 2 of his choices, but that doesn't mean to say that he's not a good Prime Minister. And of course, I do know firsthand how hard the Cabinet are working through this pandemic crisis. So on this particular one, Kenneth, I don't particularly agree. This is a very similar question about the Black Lives Matter movement, etc. From Helen, it says, hello, Craig. Please can I raise the question as to why government are being so weak in the response to BLM movements? Labour Council's decision to force the removal of our historic statues. We as a collective society have not okayed the idea that, as history is perhaps not palatable to some, that the removal of statues is somehow acceptable. It needs to be addressed before any more destruction and vandalism occurs. Helen, I totally agree with you, and I totally disagree with these crazy councils that are going out and removing statues because they think they are no longer suitable. I'm sure if you went to every one of our monuments locally here in Calder Valley, you could find something about the person that you didn't particularly like in their history. Fielden, for example, in Todmorden, in Westvale Park there. Former MP of this great constituency, and did a huge amount for the town of Todmorden, whether it was the grammar school, the fantastic architecture in the town hall, or the Unitarian Church, amongst many other things that the Fielden family were responsible for. And they did that by, of course, having factories, factories of which children used to work in, which today we don't find acceptable. So what do? Do you rip down the statue of Fielden because he had child labour, what we would call child labour, in his factories making his wealth? The answer, of course, is no. It is part of our history, and it is not down to the councils to decide on what happens with these monuments. That should be down to local people via the means of a referendum if need be. But on the whole, I think everybody needs to calm down a little bit and just start to apply a little bit of common sense. Right, this one is from Kate. Kate says, "Hi Craig, can two households who have been shielding get together? We are desperate to see my parents," that's the children's grandparents, "but they live too far away for a day trip, so would need to stay over. Both households have been shielding the entire time." And that's from Kate. Well, Kate, it is now allowed for a single adult household, so adults living alone or single parents with children under 18, to form a support bubble with one another household. All those in a support bubble will be able to act as if they live in the same household, meaning you can spend time together inside each other's homes and do not need to stay 2 meters apart. So if your children are under the age of 18 and you live by yourself with them, you can form a support bubble with your parents. You cannot, however, mix households with anyone outside that support bubble. So you don't quite say there, Kate, whether you're whether you are single or you're married or have a partner. But if you are single, then by all means, yes, you can. If not, you're going to have to wait a little bit longer. Let's not forget, this isn't about the government saying, you're not allowed to do this. This is about actually you not doing this to protect the health not only of you, but also to protect the health of your parents and family around them. So for the sake of a few more weeks, it is better to be safe than sorry, because I'm sure if anything happened, you would never forgive yourself for that. So if you're single and your children are under 18, then by all means, you can bubble those two families together. Right, this one's from James. James, I'll take this and I'll check out the comments, but for the minute. But James says, with the deadline for extending the transition period fast approaching and a deal with the European Union looking less and less likely with each day passing, or passing day, will the government consider extending the transition period to allow trade talks to continue? And that's from James. Well, the simple answer to your question, James, is no. The government are quite clear they will not extend the transition period. They have set some very clear guidelines and timescales for the Europeans and, of course, our own negotiators to come up with a deal, and they need to do that within the time frame that has been set. Because the reality is, It is in our legislation now that we will leave on the 31st of December, and I don't see any appetite whatsoever from anybody in government, nor indeed from anybody that went through the paralysis of Parliament for 3 years prior to that to revisit that situation again. So the reality is we are going at the end of the year. There will not be a transition extension, and the Prime Minister has made that very, very clear. Okay, let me just see if I can work out how to get these up. Oh, here we go. Right. Joan says, good afternoon, hello, and Alex says, hi Craig, hi. Joan says, no matter your colour or your race, police should treat people with humanity rights in all aspects of life, no matter what the situation. That's absolutely correct, Joan. But on similar note, those very same people that are expecting respect from the police should also respect the human rights and civil liberties of those that are not protesting at the time. So anyway, we've covered that. Richard says over 60 police officers. Yep. Rodney says, good afternoon, Craig. Hi. Roger Drayton, I'm concerned that as the coronavirus restrictions are lifted, and because here in Calderdale we have thankfully had a low infection rate, the track and trace system is being relied upon to keep it that way. As it is currently working, an individual is only identified as a potential transmitter if they have fallen ill and a test has confirmed the infection. Time is of the essence, therefore, as an infection person has already been infected for at least 2 days before feeling ill. But it is no plan. Okay, I think, Roger, I've already answered that question. So, but basically, yeah, time is of the essence. You're absolutely right. We do have a low infection rate in Calderdale, and that's being picked up. You're absolutely right. People do need to go and get tested if they have symptoms. That's. I don't think there's another question in there. I think we've covered that off already. Joan Hutchinson says policing policy needs writing again and looking very closely at all aspects of policing. Yep, perhaps you're right, Joan. Right. Daniel Greenwood says, hi, Craig. Is there any further update on potential help for the events industry? I operate one of the UK's leading marquee hire companies, and our order books has been decimated. We were one of the first to feel the effects, and we will be one of the last to come out of it. There are no further announcements as of yet, Daniel, in regards to, I think, Daniel, you've written to me already about the self-employed scheme, which I think is what you're talking about. Basically, apart from the bounce back loans, the other loans that are available, plus the furlough, if you're in that position to take furlough, plus the self-employed scheme if you're self-employed, and the VAT deferral rates. There haven't been any further announcements apart from those at this particular moment in time. Okay, got your point, Roger. Can we go to London from Yorkshire to your family? I think that one basically, Joan, is the same as I answered before. If you are a single person meeting a single person in another household, you're allowed to travel around the country, providing your social distancing. You could have your bubble with another person in London. If that's so as you want. Okay. Many people believe that, this is from Richard, many people believe they have had COVID back in December and January. Have you seen any evidence that suggests this is may or may not be correct? There was a confirmed case in November in France. The other part of the current tracing is that you can now, currently it's going out to those that are have COVID. There is there is a second test, which I can't quite think what it's called. You can get to find out whether you've had it, and it's currently going out to frontline key workers and should be available in the next 2 or 3 weeks for other people to go and have test as well to see whether you've physically had it. It's called the antibody test. I've just realised what it's called. And you can go and have that to check, Richard. Okay. Amanda says, do you support the WASPy campaign when so much hardship for older women? Amanda, yes, I've always supported the WASPy campaign. In fact, my own wife is a WASPy herself and reminds me of it constantly. But the reality, though, is, as we've seen from the court case that happened, that took the government to court, it's very, very unlikely that we are going to get any change in that. But I am part of the WASPy all-party parliamentary group. I have spoken in Parliament about it before, and I do fully understand and hear the issues that WASPy women have. Okay, Jones just come back and said she helped me out with the antibody test, but currently it's for all NHS workers who've been on the front line. There are plans for that to go and be extended further within society. Okay, some more questions that came in through the week. We've got, hi Craig, what do you think about Calderdale's decision to advise schools to now reopen from Monday? Too little, too late, in my opinion. Monday. Well, I had a bit of a rant 2 or 3 weeks ago about Calderdale's decision to go against government advice. They very clearly made that decision because they said the government hadn't hit its 5 tests. They've had to do a U-turn on that this last week because the government have indeed hit the 5 tests, but they've decided that schools can reopen from this Monday. I dare say we will have a slow uptake because we have a situation where we have multiple buildings throughout Calderdale where social distancing is going to be difficult to do. But those decisions will be down to the head teacher and indeed the governing body. And I suspect we'll have to get to a point where we're down to a 1 meter distancing from 2 meter before we see a further reopening of all schools in September. But September's a very long way away in terms of this pandemic. But yeah, it's good news. Finally, Calderdale, in my view, shouldn't have interfered anyway. It's got nothing to do with Calderdale at all. It is down to the head teachers. It is down to the governing body of each school to determine whether they should or should not open the school. And there is a set of national guidelines to help them. And that's what they will be taking their decisions on. So good decision by Calderdale, but for the wider school opening, we're now going to have to wait until September. Jasmine asks, do you support the government's position of suspending Sunday trading legislation as a tool to stimulate economic growth? Jasmine, absolutely not. This is one topic that winds me off the clock. There is a group of people in this country that have been trying to get shops open completely on a Sunday for a very long time, and I just suspect this is just an excuse to finally change the Sunday trading laws. I suspect you. I'm not quite sure from your question whether you're for or against. They're saying to stimulate economic growth, but look, the Germans don't open anything on a Sunday, so and their economy is much bigger than ours. We have, as a government, pledged billions of pounds to help out our high streets, which are struggling anyway from online shopping. Here in the Calder Valley, we've got three massive amounts of money. We've got nearly £20 million for Elland from the Future High Streets Fund to regenerate Elland High Street. We've got Todmorden and Brighouse High Streets that have got a further £25 million each to regenerate the High Street. That's all government money that is being put in to regenerate. What we then don't want to do is the only people that benefit from some longer Sunday trading, of course, are the big supermarkets. And the idea is that through the pandemic, if we allow longer trading hours on Sunday, it will stop the queues. Well, I'm sorry, if you go and have a look at the queues aren't anywhere near the length they first were. People are now shopping, doing weekly shops instead of daily shops, so they're going to the supermarket less frequently. And Sunday is the only day of the week where there is an advantage to the small high street or corner shop. So I'm dead against this. I think it's just a guise to get Sunday trading laws changed completely. And if you, I don't buy the economic stimulation argument at all, because if you have a look at some of the bigger economies in the world, like Germany, you will see that they don't have to open on Sundays. I also used to be a retailer for 30 years before I became a member of Parliament. So I also understand the desire of big corporate businesses like our supermarkets who want to have more market share. Well, I'm sorry, they're not going to get support from me to do that. Right, I think that's all the questions I have for this week. Let me just double check on here. Let me have a look. Joan says, would love to see Brighouse Market open properly and get local communities involved. Totally agree. Are Calderdale going to support entrepreneurs to build strong businesses in Calderdale? To be fair to Calderdale, they do quite a lot of that anyway. That the business department is very good at supporting local businesses, and we do work a lot with local businesses and involve Calderdale on many issues. So there is absolutely no reason why, in my view, that wouldn't carry on. So I think that's about it for now, for this week. So thank you all for listening in. We're going to carry on doing this every Friday at 4 o'clock. So if anybody has any questions that they want to ask, please email me in. We're going to advertise it like we always do on Facebook. So by all means, add your questions on there too. And with a bit of luck, I'll answer as many of the questions in the time we have as I can. So anyway, there we are. Have a great weekend. Stay safe. Don't forget social distancing. Most important for your health, for your family's health, for your friends' health, that we carry on social distancing. It's most important. Thanks very much.